Why all of a sudden is everybody talking about chemical and biological weapons? It was just a couple of weeks ago that Joe Biden, the President of the United States, promised to respond, quote, in kind to the potential use of chemical weapons by Russia. In other words, the United States would use its chemical weapons against the Russians if they used theirs against the Ukrainians. And then, because you're not supposed to admit that you have chemical weapons, Joe Biden's national security advisor, whose memory still works, walked it back and told us, oh, no, the president misspoke, just like he did when he told us this was a regime change war. We would never use chemical weapons, said Jake Sullivan. But for some reason, a lot of people in Washington, in both parties, are still talking a lot about the U.S. using chemical weapons in Russia. Here's one of the most limited members of Congress, Michael McCaul, Republican from Texas, widely regarded as a mouthpiece for the intel agencies. Listen to what he says.
What would happen if a chemical weapon was dropped in Ukraine and or a short-range tactical nuke? The question there is, would the world idly sit back and watch that happen without doing anything?
What should we do?
I just find it hard to believe. And when I talk to the Secretary General of NATO, their job is really to defend NATO, not trigger Article 5. But in my judgment, that's beyond the pale. That crosses a red line. And I think if that happens, we would have to respond in kind.
So stories like this give people like Michael McCaul a chance to give you a moral lecture on television, which is the whole appeal. But again, all of a sudden you have sitting members of Congress with access to high-level intelligence talking casually about using chemical weapons or nuclear weapons against a nuclear-armed state. So it's not a defense of Russia. You don't have to believe Russia was justified in invading Ukraine. They weren't. It's not a defense of Putin to think to yourself, hold on a second here. How did we get here? Talking about nuclear war on the Sunday shows. Should we be? Are we ready for that? It's clear no one in the Biden administration cares or is worried about it at all. The escalation continues at a remarkable pace, and you know that if you watch the money. We're continuing to shovel cash to the government of Ukraine, which just last year Democrats described as one of the most corrupt in the world, but whatever. And we're sending money to Ukraine at levels that are astounding. Joe Biden signed off on a funding package in March for $13.6 billion in aid for Ukraine. Then he sent an additional $1.3 billion in late April. Then he sent $350 million in February. He also sent $800 million in March. In addition to all of that, Joe Biden has requested another $33 billion for Ukraine. And that request includes funding for, quote, longer-range artillery of a heavier caliber than the howitzers we've already been sending there. In other words, we're sending artillery to Ukraine that could easily strike Russian territory, and we're sending $33 billion to do it. Now, how much is $33 billion in a moment when Congress is writing checks for trillions? Well, to put it into context, $33 billion is more than double what the Biden administration spends protecting our national borders. And that's just one check to Ukraine, but it's double the annual budget to protect our borders. The Biden administration, in fact, it's more than double, just requested $15 billion for the entire budget for U.S. Customs and Border Protection, and just $8 billion for the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So we're spending twice on their borders what we spend on our own in one request, in 1 week. How much is $33 billion? Well, it's more than we spend on Veterans Affairs every month, taking care of our own veterans. And the saddest point of all of this is, it hasn't caused the Russians to withdraw from Ukraine, and no one's claiming that it will. It hasn't bankrupted Putin. It hasn't crippled the Russian economy. It certainly hurt our economy. What's going on here? Well, the Daily Mail is reporting that a Russian oligarch with close ties to Vladimir Putin, he's on the bad guy list, right? No, because he met with the president's son in Moscow several times to discuss investment deals. So that oligarch, strangely, is being sanctioned by the UK, but not by the Biden administration. The Biden administration, for all its bellicose talk about Russia, has decided not to sanction the one oligarch who's friends with the president's son.